Hall of Prime had never felt so cold. Ambassador Lisa stood at the human delegation podium and looked across the massive circular chamber where representatives from 12 spacefaring species had gathered. Some floated in liquid tanks, others perched on specially designed seats that matched their unusual bodies. But all of them were watching the center platform where High Arbiter of the Dominion was speaking. Tall and covered in dark green scales that reflected the chamber lights, his yellow eyes moved slowly across the assembled delegates as he spoke in a voice that carried absolute confidence. They had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 8,000 years. They had crushed rebellions and absorbed smaller species into their empire. When they spoke, other species listened. So felt Commander Daniel Shaw standing beside her. He was the military assigned to her diplomatic mission, a veteran of 30 years in the United Nations Space Command. His face showed nothing, but Lisa could see his hands were clenched tight behind his back. One clawed hand and pointed directly at the human delegation. He declared that the Dominion was formally claiming the Arcturus Corridor under Section 447 of the Galactic Charter. He explained that human vessels had violated a sacred territorial marker placed by ancestors 3,000 years ago. This violation gave the legal authority to seize all human assets within the corridor and to establish permanent military presence in the region. So felt her stomach drop. The Arcturus Corridor was not just a trade route. It was the only connection between Earth and the outer colonies. Losing it would cut off 2 billion human beings from the rest of their species. It would strangle human expansion for generations. Looked around the chamber for support, but the other delegates avoided her eyes. The ambassador studied his notes. The representative adjusted her translation device. The delegates simply turned away. None of them would challenge them. None of them ever did. She stepped forward to her speaking platform and requested recognition from the assembly chair. The chair, an elderly with silver fur, granted her the floor with obvious reluctance. Spoke carefully. She said that humanity had no knowledge of any territorial marker in the Arcturus Corridor. She explained that human ships had traveled that route for 150 years without any objection. She asked why this claim was being made now, after so many decades of peaceful habit. Showing rows of sharp teeth, he replied that the marker had been recently rediscovered by archaeological teams. He said that ignorance of the law was no excuse for violating it. He added that perhaps if humans had bothered to study galactic history before spreading across the stars like insects, they would have known to respect territory. Delegates made sounds that might have been louder. Lisa felt heat rising in her face, but she kept her voice steady. She requested time to verify the claims and to consult with her government. She asked for a standard deliberation period of 72 hours. One hand dismissively, he said that he would grant the humans their 72 hours. He said it would make no difference. The evidence was absolute, the law was clear, and the fleet was already prepared to enforce the claim. He suggested that humanity use the time to prepare for evacuation rather than wasting effort on point subjection. Assembly chair declared the session suspended for 72 hours. Delegates began leaving the chamber, many of them casting pitying looks at the human representatives as they passed. Shaw leaned close to Lisa and spoke quietly. He asked if she had noticed that none of the other delegates seemed surprised by the announcement. Lisa nodded. She had noticed. This had been planned for a long time. The other species knew it was coming and had already decided to do nothing. Together through the curved hallways of Prime Station. The walls were decorated with artwork from 100 different worlds, but Lisa barely saw any of it. Her mind was racing through possibilities. Humanity had no legal standing to challenge an ancient territorial claim. They had no military force that could match them. They had no allies willing to stand with them. Guided her into a small private communication room and sealed the door. He told her that there was something she needed to know. He explained that Earth Command had been preparing for something like this for the past 20 years. They had known that eventually one of the elder species would try to push humanity back. Lisa stared at him. She asked why she had not been informed. She was the senior diplomatic representative for human interests in this sector. Replied that the plan required absolute secrecy until the right moment. He said that moment had now arrived. He told her that what she needed to do was exactly what she had already done. Ask for time. Show weakness. Let them believe they had already won. So demanded to know what the plan actually was. She said that in 72 hours, they would legally own the only route to the outer colonies. 2 billion people would be trapped. Pulled out a small communication device and typed a short message. He said the message was going to Earth Command right now. He said it contained only 2 words, activate lighthouse. Lisa asked what lighthouse meant. Finally allowed himself a small smile. He said that humanity had spent 2 centuries watching the elder species outright. They had learned how to win their victories. They had found the weakness that they had kept hidden for thousands of years. He said that in 72 hours, they were going to learn that underestimating humans was the worst mistake they had ever made. Lisa looked at the commander for a long moment. She asked if this plan would actually work. Replied that it had to work, because if it failed, humanity would spend the next 1,000 years as servants to species who saw them as nothing more than clever animals. He said that was not a future he was willing to accept. Straightened her shoulders and took a deep breath. She told Shaw that she needed to know everything, every detail of the plan. If she was going to play the role of desperate diplomat, she needed to understand what victory would look like. Nodded and began to explain. Outside the small room, the station continued its slow rotation among the stars. The delegation was already celebrating their easy victory. The other species were already writing humanity off as another failed experiment in civilization. None of them knew what was coming. Grace stood at the center of the United Nations Space Command war room and studied the holographic display floating before her. Blue dots represented human ships. Red dots represented the fleet massing near the Arcturus Corridor. The red dots outnumbered the blue by more than 3 to 1. He walked up beside her and handed her a cup of coffee. He was the chief strategist for the command, a man who had spent 40 years studying galactic history and politics. His hair had gone completely gray, but his eyes were sharp and focused. The coffee without looking away from the display. She said that they were moving faster than they had expected. 3 battle groups were already in position. 2 more were on the way. He said that was eager. The High Arbiter had waited a long time for the opportunity. He wanted to crush humanity before anyone could organize a response. Asked if the other pieces were in place. Confirmed that they were. The Allied representatives would arrive at Prime within 30 hours. The evidence packages had been and secure location across 12 systems. Captain Cole was ready to present the finding. Turned away from the display. She walked to a window that looked out over the Pacific Ocean far below. Earth hung in the darks of space, blue and green and white, beautiful and frail. She said that she remembered when the Senate tried to conquer humanity 150 years ago. To stand beside her, he said he remembered reading out. They had expected an easy victory. They had better ships, better weapons, and more soldiers. They thought humans would simply surrender when they saw the size of the invasion fleet. Slowly, she said that her great-grandmother had fought in that war. She had been a pilot on one of the old chemical rocket ships that humanity used back then. They had laughed at those ships. They called them primitive toys. That they stopped laughing when those primitive toys kept attacking for 7 straight years. Humans had refused to surrender. They had hidden in asteroid belts and attacked supply lines. They had crashed damaged ships and carriers. They had fought with a stubbornness that they had never encountered before. Slowly, she said that eventually they had decided that conquering humanity cost more than it was worth. They had withdrawn and never returned. But the rest of the galaxy had learned the wrong lesson from that war. They decided that humans were stubborn but ultimately harmless, a minor species that would never amount to anything important. That was exactly what they had wanted the galaxy to believe. For 150 years, humanity had played the role of the harmless newcomer. They had smiled and nodded and accepted whatever terms the elder species offered. They had watched and learned and waited. Back to the display. She said that now they would show the galaxy what they had really been doing all that time. So the war room opened and 3 figures entered. They were not human. The first was Delegate of a slender being with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. Her species had once controlled a Death Star system before they absorbed them 2,000 years ago. Now they exist as servants within the Dominion. They're stripped of resources and their place scattered. Second was Ambassador of a short creature covered in brown fur with clever hands and a quick mind. They had been independent until 3 centuries ago when they claimed their trade routes using the same tactics they were now using against humanity. Third was Elder of the tall being made of living crystal that chimed softly when it moved. They had lost half their territory to the 500 years ago and had spent every year since then playing revenge. Each of them formally, she thanked them for coming despite the risk. If they discovered the meeting, there would be consequences for all their species. In a voice like flowing water, she said that her people had lived under rule for 2,000 years. They had seen their culture erased and their children forced to serve masters. Any risk was worth taking if it meant freedom. That they had been waiting for someone brave enough to stand against them. Humanity was young and sometimes foolish, but they had something the elder species had lost long ago. They had hope. Chimed in agreement. The crystal being said that they had preserved records that they thought they had destroyed. Records that proved they had been lying to the galaxy for thousands of years. At a small holographic display, it showed an image of an ancient stone mark covered in writing. He explained that this was the territorial marker the claimed humans had violated. Analysis showed that the marker was not 3,000 years old. It was less than 50 years old. The stone had been artificially aged and placed in the Arcturus corridor specifically to justify the claim. In forward, she said that her people had similar evidence. The markers that justified ownership of space were also Futuristic. She said that Captain Cole had helped them verify the evidence using techniques they did not know existed. To each of the alien representatives in turn, she said that tomorrow they would present this evidence to the Galactic Assembly. They would show the galaxy that the mighty Dominion was built on lies. Asked what would happen when the everything and threatened war. That they were counting on exactly that response. She said that they had ruled through fear for so long that they had forgotten how to do anything else. When they were exposed, they would react with aggression, and that aggression would prove everything humanity was claiming. Or asked if humanity was truly prepared to face the fleet in battle. It was quiet for a moment. Then she said that she hoped it would not come to that, but if it did, humanity would not run. They would stand their ground and trust that the galaxy would finally see them for what they really were. Allied representatives exchanged glances, then spoke for all of them. She said that if humanity stood, they would stand with them, and voiced their agreement. For the first time in galactic history, the species that they had dismissed as weak and conquered were joined together. The forgotten and the overlooked were finding their voices. Had no idea what was coming. Cole had spent 15 years gathering the evidence that now filled the datapad in his hands. He had traveled to forgotten archives on abandoned worlds. He had bribed officials and stolen records from secured facilities. He had nearly died 6 times in the process. Now all of that work came down to the moment. Galactic Assembly Chamber was fuller than it had been 72 hours ago. Word had spread that something unusual was happening with the human delegation. Species that normally ignored assembly meetings had sent observers. The viewing galleries were packed with journalists and diplomats from across the galaxy. Arbiter sat in the delegation area, looking annoyed by the crowd. He had expected a quick and quiet victory. Instead, he was facing what appeared to be some kind of spectacle. His yellow eyes tracked Ambassador Lisa as she walked to the speaking platform. She requested recognition from the assembly chair and was granted the floor. She stood straight and spoke clearly. She said that humanity had spent the past 72 hours examining the claim to the Arcturus corridor. She said they had discovered something that every species in this chamber needed to see. The dismissive sound. He said that no amount of human legal tricks would change the facts. The territorial marker was authentic. The law was clear. Humanity had violated space and would pay the price. She ignored him. She nodded to Captain Cole, who stepped forward and activated a holographic display in the center of the chamber. The display showed the ancient stone marker that they had presented as evidence. Spoke in a calm and professional voice. He explained that his team had conducted a detailed analysis of the marker using 7 different dating techniques. He said that all 7 techniques agreed. The marker was not 3,000 years old. It was 47 years old. The stone had been treated with chemicals to make it appear ancient, but the treatment had left traces that could be detected with proper equipment. Spread through the chamber, rose from his seat, his scales darkening with anger. He declared that this was a human fabrication designed to avoid justice. He demanded that the assembly reject this false evidence. So raised her hand for silence. She said that she understood the High Arbiter's objection. That was why humanity had not come alone today. Of the rose from her seat in the gallery. She walked down to the central floor of the chamber, her blue skin pale under the bright lights. She said that they had evidence of their own to present. Galactic display changed to show a different marker, the one covered in ancient writing. Explained that the marker had been used 2,000 years ago to justify the conquest of space. She said that her people had always believed the marker was authentic. They had accepted their fate as the price of an ancient tree violation. Voice grew stronger. She said that 5 years ago, a human intelligence officer named Cole had contacted the underground. He had offered to help them analyze the marker using human technology. The results had been devastating. Display showed the analysis data. The marker was not 2,000 years old. It was less than 100 years old at the time of the conquest. They had forged it to justify stealing territory. Chamber erupted in noise. Delegates shouted questions and accusations. Several officials stood up in outrage. His voice cut through the chaos, demanding order and insisting that this was all lies created by human spies. The revelations were not finished. Ambassador of the came forward with evidence that the markers justifying control of trade routes were also Futuristic. Elder of the presented records showing that claims to mining territories were based on fabricated artifacts. Cole displayed a map of the galaxy with highlight regions. Each highlight represented a territorial claim that they had made over the past 3,000 years. He explained that his team had identified at least 47 claims that showed signs of evidence fabrication. The Dominion had not grown through legitimate conquest or ancient right. It had grown through systematic fraud. Assembly chair struggled to maintain order. Delegates were leaving their seats and gathering in groups, talking urgently among themselves. Species that had accepted dominance for centuries were suddenly questioning everything they had believed. Through the crowd until he stood face to face with Lisa. His voice was low and dangerous. He said that humanity had made a terrible mistake. He said that it did not matter whether the evidence was real or fabricated. They had the largest fleet in the galaxy. They would take what they wanted regardless of what any assembly decided. So met his gaze without flinching. She said that she had expected him to say that. She said that humanity had prepared for the moment for a very long time. He asked what humanity could possibly do against the war machine. He said that human ships were slow and weak. Their weapons were primitive. Their soldiers were soft creatures who could barely survive in the vacuum of space. They had crushed species 100 times more powerful than humanity. Smiled. She said that they were about to learn what happened when they threatened a species that refused to be afraid. Communication device buzzed. He looked at it and his expression changed. His scales went pale. He turned and walked quickly out of the chamber without another word. And Shaw appeared beside Lisa. He reported that the fleet had begun moving toward human space, had given the order to attack before arriving at the assembly. He had never intended to let humanity defend themselves. The whole trial had been a show. Lisa asked how long they had before they arrived at the border. I checked his device. He said 14 hours. Lisa nodded slowly. She said that they had known that it was coming. Now it was time for the final phase of the plan. She told Shaw to contact Admiral and tell her to prepare for broadcast. I asked if Lisa was sure about this. Once they started, there was no going back. So looked around the chaos chamber. She saw delegates arguing and demanding answers. She saw the representatives of species that had suffered under rule for thousands of years finally finding the courage to speak. She said that they had already gone too far to turn back. Now they needed to finish what they had started. Fate of humanity would be decided in the next 14 hours. Bridge of the carrier Endurance was silent except for the hum of equipment and the soft beeping of sensor displays. Lieutenant Amy sat at her tackle station and watched the red dots on her screen moving closer. Each dot was a warship. There were over 200 of them. Well, Grace stood at the center of the bridge with her hands clasped behind her back. Her face was calm, but could see the tension in her shoulders. The Admiral had commanded human forces for 30 years. She had never faced odds like this. The fleet consisted of 47 ships. They were arranged in a defense formation at the edge of the Arcturus quarter, blocking the only route they could use to reach the outer colonies. Behind them were 2 billion people who had no way to escape if this defense failed. Commander of the appeared on the main. He was older than his scales faded to dull gray-green, but his eyes were sharp and cold. He had commanded forces for over a century. He had never lost a battle. Without greeting or formality, he said that the human fleet had 1 hour to withdraw from the Arcturus quarter. Any ships remaining after that time would be destroyed. He said that humanity could avoid bloodshed by accepting the reality of their situation. They were stronger. The outcome was inevitable. Calmly, she said that humanity had no intention of withdrawing. She explained that the Arcturus quarter was the only connection to the outer colonies. Abandoning it would mean abandoning 2 billion people. That was not something humanity would do. Almost surprised, he said that he had reviewed the human military records. He knew that human forces had never won a major engagement against an elder species. He knew that human ships were slower and less heavily armed than vessels. He asked why humanity would choose destruction over survival. I that some things were worth fighting for even when victory seemed impossible. She said that humanity had learned long ago that the only truly hopeless situation was the one where you gave up without trying. Did the transmission without further comment, the countdown began. The Endurance bridge reported that she was detecting unusual energy readings from the flagship. The reading suggested that was charring his primary weapons early. He was not planning to wait the full hour. As if she had expected this, she opened a channel to the entire human fleet. She told them that every officer and crew member had volunteered for the mission knowing the risks. She said that in a few minutes they would face the greatest test humanity had ever known. She told them that whatever happened, she was proud to serve with them. Channel closed, turned to her communications officer and asked if the broadcast was ready. Officer confirmed that it was. Every communication relay in the sector had been prepared. The signal would reach every inhabited system in the galaxy within minutes. Ordered the broadcast to begin. The galaxy, screens flickered and displays changed. On space stations and planetary surfaces, in ships and homes and government buildings, beings of 100 different species suddenly found themselves watching a live feed from the edge of human space. They saw the small human fleet facing the massive armada. They heard Admiral explain that humanity was standing against aggression and demanding justice. Broadcast included all the evidence that had been presented at the assembly. It showed the forge markers and the testimony of the end. It showed high arbiter threatening humanity with destruction. It showed the fleet moving to attack before the assembly had even voted. Directly to the galaxy, she said that humanity was not asking anyone to fight for them. She said that all they asked was that the galaxy watch, see what to do when their lives are exposed, see how they respond when a weak species refuses to submit. Just for yourselves what kind of empire they have built. The flagship fleet commander received reports that the broadcast was reaching every corner of known space. Trillions of beings were watching his fleet prepare to destroy a species that had simply asked for justice. He hesitated for the first time in his long career. Voice came through on a secure channel from Prime. The High Arbiter was furious. He demanded that attack immediately. He said that the broadcast changed nothing. Once humanity was destroyed, the other species would remember their place. They would remember that the answer challenges with fire. Lied that the situation had become complicated. If he attacked now, the galaxy would see thee as aggressors. It could damage their reputation for generations. Claimed that he did not care about reputation. He ordered to destroy the human fleet and end this embarrassment. Was the channel? He sat in his command chair and studied the display showing the human formation. 47 ships against his 200. They had no chance of winning, but they were not running. They were not begging. They were simply standing there, waiting, broadcasting their defiance to the entire galaxy. The Endurance reported that the weapons were fully charged. The hour was almost up. To her further report, she ordered all ships to prepare for combat. She said that whatever happened in the next few minutes, humanity would face it with dignity. Countdown reached 0. The fleet began to move forward. Shouted in surprise, new contacts were appearing on our senders. Ships were drying out of hyperspace behind the human fleet, not ships. The identification signals showed markings, and others they did not recognize. 15 ships from 5 different species took position beside the human fleet. They were not powerful warships. Most of them were old and poorly maintained, but they were there. They had come. Its voice came through the communication system. She said that they had lived under tyranny for 2,000 years. She said they would not let humanity stand alone. Ambassador's voice followed. He said that they had lost everything to greed. He said that they would show the galaxy that small species could still have courage. So at last, the crystal being said that they had waited 5 centuries for the moment. They would wait no longer. Something she had not expected. Her eyes were wet. She blinked quickly and composed herself. She opened a channel to the allied ships and welcomed them to the line. Galaxy watched. The fleet hesitated. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the Dominion faced an enemy that was not afraid. Commander stared at his tactical display and tried to understand what he was seeing. The 17 new ships that had joined the human fleet did not change the military calculation. His forces still outnumbered the combined allied fleet by more than 3 to 1. Victory was still certain. Something had changed. The broadcast was reaching every corner of the galaxy. Billions of beings were watching the moment unfold in real time. They were seeing species that they had conquered and dismissed standing together against the Dominion. They were seeing something that had not happened in 3,000 years. In a channel to his fleet commanders, he ordered them to hold position. He needed time to consult with the High Arbiter. Face appeared on the secure channel almost immediately. The High Arbiter's scales were dark with rage. He demanded to know why I had not attacked. He said that every moment of delay made the Dominion look weak. Lied carefully. He said that attacking now would prove everything the humans were saying about them. The galaxy was watching. If the Dominion destroyed a fleet that included ships from 5 different species, the political consequences would be severe. Dismissed his concerns. He said that they had ruled through strength for 8,000 years. Other species respected power. Once the Allied fleet was destroyed, the galaxy would remember that challenging the Dominion meant death. Asked if the High Arbiter had seen the reports from Prime. Several species that had always supported were now calling for an investigation into territorial claims. The delegation had demanded an emergency vote. Even the, who had never opposed the Dominion on anything, were expressing concern. Silent for a moment, then he repeated his order: attack now, destroy the fleet in this. Was the channel? He sat in his command chair and looked at the display. 47 human ships, 17 allied ships, all of them sitting motionless in space, waiting for him to decide their fate, none of them running. The Endurance Bridge lieutenant reported that the fleet was still holding position. Admiral nodded and checked the communication logs. The broadcast had reached every major population center in the galaxy. Commentary was already flooding the information networks. Analysts and journalists were discussing the evidence of fraud. Political leaders were making statements. The galaxy was watching, and the galaxy was beginning to understand. And Rochelle's voice came through from Prime. He reported that the assembly had reconvened. Ambassador had called for an immediate vote on a resolution to investigate all territorial claims from the past 1,000 years. Asked how the vote was going. Said that they had voted yes. They had voted yes. Bees that had been silent for centuries were finally speaking. The vote was still ongoing, but the momentum was clear. The flagship received the same reports. The Dominion was losing support by the men. Every second that passed without an attack, more species found the courage to question authority. The empire that his ancestors had built was cracking under the weight of its own lies. Voice came through again demanding an update, made a decision. Told that he was withdrawing the fleet. He explained that the political cost of attacking now was too high. The Dominion needed to regroup and develop a new strategy. This battle was lost. Exploded with fury, he ordered to attack immediately or face charges of treason. He said that no commander had ever retreated from inferior forces. He said that would be remembered as the greatest coward in Dominion history. Calmly, he said that he would rather be remembered as a coward than as the commander who destroyed the Dominion through blind pride. He ended the transmission and gave the order to withdraw. The Endurance Bridge, watching disbelief as the red dots on her display began moving away. The fleet was leaving. 200 warships were turning around and retreating without firing a single shot. Allowed herself a small smile. She opened a channel to the Allied fleet and informed them that they were withdrawing. She thanked every ship and every crew member for their courage. She said that this day would be remembered. The assembly vote concluded. The resolution to investigate territorial claims passed with overwhelming support. For the first time in galactic history, the Dominion faced official scrutiny of its expansion. Arbiter was recalled to space to face the Dominion Council. His aggressive response to the crisis had damaged standing throughout the galaxy. The Council needed someone to blame and had made himself an easy target. Dr. Lisa addressed the assembly one final time. She said that humanity had not won this victory through strength or cunning. They had won because they refused to accept a system built on lies. She said that the galaxy had a choice to make. They could continue to let powerful species dominate through fear and fraud, or they could build something better. Said that humanity was ready to help build that better future, but they could not do it alone. She invited every species that had suffered under tyranny to join a new coalition. A coalition based on transparency and justice and mutual respect. Stood and pledged support. Ambassador pledged support. Elder pledged support. One by one, representatives from a dozen species rose to join the new alliance. Later, Commander Shaw and Ambassador stood together at a viewport on Prime. Outside, ships from the new coalition were gathering for the first joint military exercise in galactic history. Said that he still could not quite believe it had worked. They had bluffed the most powerful empire in the galaxy with a handful of ships and a broadcast signal. Her head, she said it was not a bluff. Humanity had been willing to fight and die for what they believed. They had seen that willingness and realized that some victories cost more than they were worth. I asked what came next. The Dominion was weakened but not destroyed. They would be back eventually, probably with a smarter strategy. Agreed. She said that the galaxy was changing, but change was slow. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments when humanity would need to decide what they were willing to stand for. Said that humanity was not alone anymore. They had proven that small species could stand together and make a difference. They had shown the galaxy that courage was more powerful than fear. Looked out at the gathered fleet. Ships from species that had been enemies for centuries were now flying information together. Crews that had never met were learning to work as allies. Something new was being born. Said that his grandmother used to tell him that humans had survived every challenge in their history because they refused to give up. She said that stubbornness was humanity's greatest gift. She said that maybe stubbornness was exactly what the galaxy needed right now. Someone to look at impossible odds and say no. Someone to stand up when everyone else was sitting down. Ships outside began their exercise, the first steps of a new era. Humanity had made its move, and the galaxy would never be the same.